30,000 people, and it's mainly a university town. So everybody's either working or studying at the university, which we call the University of Life Sciences. Now, this is our building. This is the building where the Division of Human Nutrition and Health is located on the Wageningen campus. And this is us. We have 200 people in the nutrition and health department from all over the world. This is us. We have 5 groups, I should say, 5 chair groups. And one is on nutritional biology, global nutrition, transference science, molecular nutrition, and nutrition and disease. So together we're covering about all things that need to be covered on nutrition and health. And this is the group of diet and cancer. And together we are conducting research on diet, nutrition, physical activity, and cancer for over 30 years now in Wageningen. And we're looking at the role of nutrition in the prevention of cancer, and we're looking at the role of nutrition during and after treatment of cancer. And we have a master program in nutrition and health for those who may be interested and are not a nutritional scientist yet. Something you can apply for if you're interested. It's a 5-year, in total a 5 years program, 3 years bachelor's, 2 years master program. And in that course, we also have a master course on nutrition and cancer, which is a 6 weeks course. Now, one day in 2012, Ghanian food scientist Philip came to Wageningen to study nutrition and cancer. And she was in my class, and she actually opened my eyes, because for the first time she was asking me questions that I never ever thought of before. I was focusing on nutrition in Western countries, in high income countries, and she asked me these questions. What is the incidence? Why is the incidence of Western cancers in Africa increasing? Why is breast cancer occurring in younger women in Africa? Are risk factors of cancer in low middle income countries similar to high income countries? Is obesity a risk factor for breast cancer in Africa? And what can we do in Africa? And she was pertinent to get answers to these questions. She started a PhD with me, focusing on breast cancer and nutrition. And I visited her in 2014, and I'm now in, I think, in a place where you know I am. So this is in. I also gave a talk to at the Faraja Breast Cancer Support meeting, and we did some research together, and we also visited the Nairobi Cancer Registry, and I was very impressed with their work. So what I'm going to talk with you about today is I'm going to touch on cancer in the world, and especially in Africa, and especially in Kenya. I'm going to talk about nutrition during treatment, and I'm going to talk about nutrition after treatment. So 3 topics. And as I said, it's autumn in the Netherlands, and these are my favorite mushrooms. They're so colorful, but you can't eat them. They're very toxic, but they're very beautiful to look at. So I still see people coming in. We're with 82 people now. Wow, that's quite a lot. So in between, I'll have a break, so you can ask me questions in the chat. I can't see the chat, but Philip can, so we touch on that later on. So when Phyllis came in to my office and asked me these questions, I thought, okay, well, I have to look into this, because I've always thought cancer is not a major problem in Africa. There are far more important problems that you have to deal with, and cancer is not one of them. And then I saw these things like cancer kills more people than AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria combined. And I never ever knew that. And I looked in the figures for cancers in the world. 18 million new cancer cases are diagnosed per year globally. Lung cancer, breast cancer, and colorectal cancer and prostate cancer are the main cancers that we see globally. When you look at where these people are diagnosed, then most people come from Asia, as of course also the largest population in the world, then in the Americans, then Europe, and then Africa. 6% of all new cases are occurring in Africa. Then this is 2018. What we do see is still a sharp rise in the incidence of cancer globally. But what we also see is that we see it mainly in less developed countries. So we see a steeper rise in less developed countries than in more developed countries, whatever developed might mean, but you can also say low income and high income countries. So you can think of what could be the reason. Is this because of economic progress? Is this because of an increase in life expectancy? So people have more time to get cancer? Is it because of urbanization happening around the world, or adaptation to Western lifestyles that you better not be adapted to? So all these questions, all these reasons might give a reason for this increase in the cancer rates that we see in low income countries. What we also see, though, is that there's still a difference in the types of cancer that we see globally, but also this is changing. But this is what we saw a couple of years ago. If you look at the prevalence or incidence, this is the incidence of the number of new cases of colorectal cancer in the world, you can see that it's mainly the red parts. It's mainly frequently occurring in Western countries. So in Western Europe, in America, North America, in Australia and New Zealand. Well, it's the green parts, it's not so much occurring yet in Africa and parts of Asia. But when you look at liver cancer, you see completely the opposite. Liver cancer is not something we see in Europe or in North America or in Australia, but we see it far more in Africa and parts of Asia. So that's interesting in itself, because that might point to the fact that there may be different environmental factors underlying these types of cancer. Of course, it may also be other genetic factors. But we do see a steep transition. We now see that liver cancer and cervical cancer, which were prevalent in the past in Africa, we see that that's going down. And these cancers are due to infections. So the hepatitis virus of liver cancer and the papilloma virus of cervical cancer might also be due to toxins, liver cancer. But we do see a steep increase in breast, prostate, and colorectal cancer, which are cancers which are due to either hormonal factors, reproductive factors, and are also associated with our lifestyle. Now let's move to cancer in Africa, and especially Kenya, but first Africa. When you look at cancer in Africa, you see that the dark blue are the ones where cancer is mostly diagnosed. This might also have to do with the coverage of the cancer registries. As I said, I've visited the Nairobi Cancer Registry, and they have a great coverage of the great Nairobi region. So the coverage is quite good as compared to some other countries where the coverage of the cancer registry is not up to date yet. So that's something which might also explain that cancer in Kenya, South Africa is higher. but it might also be that these countries are already more progressing economically. So we're now at 99 participants. When you look at
Prof. Kampman, I think there are people who are trying to log in. We are at 99, and then our Zoom only allows for 100 people. So we'll have to figure out. We'll send others this presentation because we are recording it.
Oh, you are recording it. Okay,
Yeah.
that's great. Good.
Thank you.
Okay. When you look at cancer in Kenya, which are the main cancers that you see, and these are data from the International Agency for Research in Cancer in Lyon, and they gather all the data.
Sorry, can I just interrupt, Philip? Can we do it on Facebook Live and direct people to Facebook Live?
Yeah, I think Cindy can do that. Cindy, you can help with that?
No problem.
Yeah, let's try and do that.
Yes, Cindy?
Just make me the host, then
Okay,
I'll do it on Facebook.
I'll do that right now. Okay, Prof, you can continue.
Yeah?
Yeah, you can continue. Cindy is the host now.
Okay, great. Well, I hope more people can join. If you're joining now, you missed the introduction, which is not the major part, so there's still a lot for you to listen to. I'm just now continuing with the types of cancer that we see mainly in Kenya, which is lung cancer, breast cancer, prostate cancer, and colorectal cancer. In men, wait a minute, I can't see my slides. This is men, I think this is women. So there's breast cancer, colorectal cancer, and lung cancer. So you see that these are types of cancers that we also see in the Western world right now. And now Phyllis came in again, and she asked me, now what about the age of breast cancer patients in Africa? Is that the same age as that you see it occurring in the Western world? And so I found this article which shows how many women are diagnosed with breast cancer at a certain point of time, so in their life. So you see that in low-income countries, 66% of the women are diagnosed below the age of 55. And in high-income countries, it's only 33% which is diagnosed below the age of 55. So there's definitely a difference, and it seems that breast cancer affects relatively young and middle-aged women in Africa. Now, you may think, oh, well, that could also be because of the difference in age distribution, which is still occurring. If you compare Nigeria with France and you look at the proportion. Somebody saying something or? No? Okay, I'll just continue then. If you look at the proportion of the population in the different countries, you of course see, as we all know, that there are more elderly people, of course, in France as compared to Nigeria. But that's changing also quite rapidly. So but it might be a reason that we see more elderly women with breast cancer in countries where you have this age distribution. This could be. But what I also learned is that from WHO is that about 70% of all cancer deaths occur in low and middle income countries. So although the incidence is lower, the mortality rate is higher. And that's also what you see in this picture. Here it's depicted, the blue is the incidence of breast cancer and the red is the mortality of breast cancer. Now in Western Europe, the incidence is high, but mortality is low. In the Netherlands, mortality of breast cancer is only 5%. So 95% survives the first 5 years, which is very high. But if you compare that to Southeastern or Southern Africa, for instance, you see that the incidence is far lower, but mortality is the same. Now, this could be because women might not get in at an early point of time, so there's no screening activities present, maybe, or maybe the road to the hospital is quite long, so the distance is too long to get there on time. Maybe women are ashamed to come in. There might be all kinds of reasons why women come in with more at later stage of the disease, so mortality might also be higher. But it could also be that it's a more aggressive disease. And as you can see, when we look at the aggressiveness of the disease and look at the grade of the pathology, so high grade pathology means a more aggressive disease, and you compare white Americans with African Americans, women from Ghana, women from Ethiopia, you see that the high grade pathology of breast cancer is higher in women from Ghana and Ethiopia, and also in African American women as compared to white American women. Now, this might also be due to some genetic background, but we don't know that. It might also be socioeconomic status. But what we also see, and I think this is really interesting, is that 10% to 20% of all breast cancer in high-income countries is what we call triple negative. So estrogen receptor negative, progesterone receptor negative, and also there's no expression of HER2. That's associated with a younger age of diagnosis, but also with African American race. You see it far more often among African Americans. So it's a more advanced disease, higher grade, and it's connected to family history of breast cancer, and especially BRCA1 mutations. So the thing is, I really would like to know whether that's also true for breast cancer in Africa. So we found this out, and then Phyllis, of course, asked the question now, is obesity a risk factor? Are risk factors of breast cancer in Africa and the Western world, are those similar or not? And I visited her at Kenyatta Hospital, not Kenyatta, this is, yeah, I think Kenyatta. Yeah, it is Ghanian. And I was surprised, by the way, that there was this poster that I saw, breast cancer, and it talked about early detection and how important that is, and about treatments and about risk factors. It mentioned family history, it mentioned being female, it mentioned obesity, it mentioned beginning a period at a younger age or beginning menopause at an older age, and it mentioned alcohol. It didn't mention age at first birth, by the way. It's also important to get your children as early as possible and as many as possible, and breastfeed them as much as you can. And that those are also risk factors for breast cancer, meaning that if you do this at an early stage with a lot of children, if possible, and breastfeed, that would also lower your risk of breast cancer. That doesn't mean that everybody who gets breast cancer did not have children or not enough or didn't breastfeed or whatever. That of course doesn't mean that, but these are risk factors. And what is a risk factor which was mentioned was also obesity. And that triggered me as well, because we know indeed that obesity or high waist-hip ratio, so too much fat on your belly as compared to your hips, increases the risk of postmenopausal breast cancer, so after the age of 55. But interestingly, it seems to decrease the risk of premenopausal breast cancer. So what is happening, and what is happening in Africa? Is that the same risk factor, or might that also be different? So I think this is where we have a short break, just to answer some questions. If you already have questions, I still see people coming in, Philip, or leaving, or whatever is happening, but there's still people in the waiting room, I see.
Yes, unfortunately, our Zoom only allows 100, so we can't take more. Yeah, that's something we will need to work on. But it's time for question. If there's any participant who has a question, please feel free to ask your question. We try to break the presentation, so we have enough time for question. Anyone with a question so far? You can unmute yourself.
Or put it in the chat.
Or put it in the chat. Okay,
Hi, Philip.
Here we go. Hi, Ongwen, how are you?
I'm okay, thanks. This is Martin. My question is, how are you guys working on the role of nutrition and the interactions between nutrition and physical activity to help kind of like amplify the benefits of both in treating cancer patients? So that's my question. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Martin. I will get to that. That is certainly something I'm going to touch on in the next part, because nutrition and physical activity, and certainly the combination between the two, is very important. So I'll touch on that. Thank you. I will.
Okay, Professor Kampman, there's also a question on what is the more prevalent risk factor?
The most prevalent risk factor for cancer depends definitely on the type of cancer you're talking about. There are more than 100 different types of cancer. So as I already showed for liver cancer, that's really a cancer which is related to a virus and not so much to lifestyle. When you look at colorectal cancer, 50% of colorectal cancer is due to lifestyle. So could be prevented if we would eat healthily and be more physically active. Now for lung cancer, you of course know that 30% could be prevented if we wouldn't smoke. So it's definitely depending on the type of cancer, but in general, for those types of cancer that are prevalent, so breast cancer, colorectal cancer, lung cancer, and prostate cancer, we say that 30% is due to smoking, and about 30% is due to other lifestyle factors, such as nutrition and physical activity.
Yeah, so she's added that she's looking at what is the more prevalent risk factor for breast cancer.
The most prevalent risk factor, and then again, in high-income countries, is obesity and alcohol consumption. Those are the main ones in the Western world. But what I really want you to work on, and I would like to contribute if you want me to, but is what are the risk factors in Africa? Because we don't know that yet. I think it's a really important question, whether those are the same risk factors, whether it's indeed obesity and alcohol consumption, besides the one that I already mentioned, which are the number of children, the age, fertile years between menarche and menopause, whether breastfeeding is done, and breastfeeding definitely prevents against breast cancer. And it's I don't know how it is in Kenya, but I see in the Western world that women are getting less and less children, that they're not breastfeeding their children anymore, but give bottle feeding and stuff like that. And that's also increasing our risk of breast cancer.
Okay.
Will I continue?
Yeah. There's a question. I think this will be probably, I don't know if you can be able to answer it. Could it be the rising cases due to more screening? They're asking maybe whether there's rising cases of cancer in Africa because we are doing more screenings. I don't know.
More screening?
Yeah.
Yeah, of course, if you are doing more screening, you will also find more cancer. That's definitely true. So you always, if you see an increase in risk, you also have to see whether indeed that's due to more screening activities. But those are not implemented in all countries yet. And even if you look at countries where there's no screening activities, you do see the increase in cancer rates.
Thank you. Well answered. Moses, you have a question?
Yes. What is the direct relationship between the research carried out by the professor on matters to do with obesity, which basically is from foods and nutrition in Africa, and that of the Western countries, due to the difference between the foods that we take and they take? There is a complete difference for our growth. There are particular plants that grow in Netherlands, there are particular plants that grow in Kenya, which are consumed here, and there are foods they consume there that cause obesity. What's the direct link, and how does this influence the general the disease to us and to them? What is the research behind her analysis towards Kenya?
Well, I think it's better for you to answer that question, because I'm not aware. There are hardly any specific data in the scientific literature where they looked at specific opinion foods and cancer. I can't find them. Maybe they are in the literature. I don't know, but it's not in the scientific journals that I can read. But it might be, for instance, we did some research in Sudan where we looked at specific molds in grains and in peanuts, for instance, due to the fact that it was stored at a very moldy condition. Aflatoxins were formed, and they also increase the risk of liver cancer. And I don't know whether that's also something happening in Kenya, or whether there's specific plant foods that might increase or decrease your risk. I have no idea, and that's certainly something that you should look into. Yeah,
I think it's a good research question for Moses that he can work on,
okay.
right?
You're very welcome.
There's thank you. Can we take one more? Then you continue with the presentation.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a question about hormonal contraceptives and breast cancer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
is there any link, correlation?
Well, it used to be in the past. There were specific types of oral contraceptives which were quite strong and had a sort of a balance between progesterones and estrogens, which were not favorable for breast cancer. It turns, we don't have it now. We don't have those oral contraceptives anymore, at least not in my country, but I have no clue about whether what the types of oral contraceptives are that are used in Kenya. So there's something to look into. It really depends on the balance between estrogens and progesterone.
Thank you. So I think we can continue with the presentation.
All right.
And then there's more questions that we can answer later, right?
Yeah, we have another break in about 2 minutes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, let's see. How do I move on? Yeah. Where am I? So we're back in Kenyatta again. And what I also saw was a dietary advisory clinic. And I was surprised because we don't have those in the Netherlands. I must say that still we have maybe a couple of dietitians involved, but not enough. And we also, we tend to involve them at a point of time where the cancer is already very far advanced, and there's really very strong malnutrition, but not at an earlier stage, and that's really important. So I was really glad to see that you're ahead of us in that sense. And we all know that, of course, cancer can influence our dietary habits, our functional function. So we see that malignant tumors, as well as their treatments, may alter the metabolism of proteins, carbohydrates, and fat in our body. It changes our appetite. It might cause, of course, nausea, vomiting. We might have problems with swallowing and chewing. It gives loss to physical functioning. I'll get to that later. Of course, there are also changes, and that's really interesting as well, in dietary preferences, which may also be related to changes in taste and smell, whereas not that much evidence yet, but I think that's also really interesting and should be anticipated on by dietitians to see what people really would like to eat still when they are under the treatment of chemotherapy, radiotherapy. So we know this, we also know that it's the other way around. So altered metabolism and changes in dietary habits might also affect the treatment and the tumor. So that's really also of great importance. So what I'm going to focus on today is what happens in body composition, so unfavorable changes that we see in body composition, as well as malnutrition and micronutrient deficiencies, and what should we do about that. So first of all, what is a main problem that we see during cancer treatment, but also during cancer progression in general, is that we see an increased inflammation in the body. We see this metabolic dysregulation. We see a lot of muscle wasting. So we see a decrease of proteins in the body, and that's shown by muscle wasting. So we see a loss of muscle mass. We see a loss of muscle strength. People can hardly open a bottle anymore, can't walk up the stairs, do have difficulties with coming up from a chair. And we do see an increase in fat mass, or it remains similar, but we also see a lot of increases in fat mass. Now, it's sometimes difficult to see, and these men look very different, but actually are not too different in the sense that they have the same amount of muscles. But on the left, this man has a lot of outside fat, but his body actually is very healthy, although he seems very obese, but he is inside, his fat surrounding his tissue is very low, and his fat in the muscle is also very low, and he doesn't have any problems with diabetes or cancer or whatsoever. So these men look different, but they are similar. And how can we see that? Well, we now have the possibility to look at CT scans. And I don't know, in Kenya it might not be regular, but in the Netherlands, we take CT scans when people come in with colorectal cancer, for instance, standard. And we take a CT scan so that we can see whether it's already in the liver or not. We can color those CT scans, and this is the way we color it. This is a man with 50 years old with a normal weight, normal BMI. And you can see there's the blue is the subcutaneous fat, the red is the muscle mass, fat is green, fat in the muscle is green, and visceral fat, that's the fat surrounding the tissue, is yellow. This is the man before treatment, and this is the same man after treatment. And his BMI is still the same. He lost a little bit of weight, but not too much. But you can see that the inside changed a lot. So especially his visceral fat increased tremendously, but also fat in the muscle changed tremendously, and his muscle mass decreased. This is what we see, and this is of course an extreme case, but this is what we see, and this is also what we need to do something about. So when I came to Kenya with Renate Winkels, who's my colleague in the Netherlands, we worked together with Phyllis and others on her PhD, and she looked at other ways of looking at fat distribution and muscle mass, bioelectrical impedance measures. And that seemed to work very well as well, to be able to follow, in her case, breast cancer patients during and after treatment. What we now know is that we need more proteins. That's definitely true. And these proteins have to come mostly from animal sources, but may also come from plant-based sources, but especially still the animal sources, and those have to be combined with physical activity. Now, you don't need to do it as these people are showing. That's definitely not necessary. You can also take the bike, as our Prime Minister is doing each day, and we're very proud of him. So you have to combine it. So nutrition and physical activity, that's why I said it takes two to tango. It's really important that that a high protein diet is also associated with more physical activity. And we now know that it should be also around the same time. So if you're going to train, you also have, or exercise, or whatever you do, also think of taking a glass of milk or nuts or whatever protein source you have available. And that's also known in Kenya, of course. I found this on the site. So move more and eat right. That's definitely very important. What we are now looking at in our part of the world research, this is my husband, by the way, on the right. On the left is my PhD student, Koen, who is looking at his fat infiltration in his upper thigh muscle. And this is also what we think is related to the fatigue that we see in cancer patients. As I said, the amount of fat infiltration is increasing in the muscles, and this might also be related, at least that's what we see, to fatigue. And we're trying with a lifestyle intervention to train these people and give them a healthy diet, and then see what happens to fat infiltration in their thighs. And we can do that at home. So they can come to the patients and measure it at home. Now, lots of people, and especially when they come in with a advanced stage of disease, may already have anorexia, may already have cachexia. So they have a muscle loss which is already quite substantial. And they might have definitely problems with eating, with swallowing. And that's not my field of research. This is what we have as dietitians work. And we also have a professor in dietetics in Wageningen. But so they tell me that I have to tell you that what you should do in case of anorexia, and of course, cachexia, is try to consume smaller and more frequent meals with minimal liquids during the day, but try to get liquids in to avoid dehydration. That's also something which is seen a lot. And if nutritional needs cannot be met through food alone, and that's also something that Phyllis was working on as she was a food chemist. Try to get fortified foods, commercially prepared or homemade, nutrient-dense beverages or foods. But, and that's something I really want to point to, is beware of taking dietary supplements. Why am I so much focusing on that? This is also because we see a lot of things happening here. And this was just last week. And there was a study published in the Journal of the National Cancer Institute. No, the Journal of Clinical Nutrition, no, Clinical Oncology, yeah. And it suggested that supplements during breast cancer chemotherapy may be harmful. And this is not the first time that this is shown. We also seen that supplements may be associated with a higher risk and a higher progression of cancer when taking this, when the cancer is already existing. And this was especially, when you look at the paper, it's especially focusing on antioxidants. And this is a very famous study which opened our eyes in the 1990s, where people thought, well, we have seen that vegetables protect against lung cancer. Now, smokers are not the ones who really like to eat a lot of vegetables, so we have to find something for them to do. And then they thought, well, it's probably the antioxidants in these green leafy vegetables and other vegetables. So why don't we put these in a pill and supplement them with antioxidants? And this intervention was high in beta-carotene, very high. It was a very high dosage of 20 milligrams of beta-carotene per day. If you have a white skin like I have, you turn orange with that kind of a dosage. So it's really, really high. This is the orange coloring agent in carrots. So what they did it for a couple of years in people who were heavy smokers, so had a very high risk of lung cancer. They smoked for more than 30 years. They gave them this beta-carotene or a placebo. They opened up the study before they actually wanted to finish it, but they thought, well, let's do an interim analysis. And what they saw was that people who had the carotene supplement had an increased risk of lung cancer, significantly increased risk of lung cancer compared to the placebo group. And that was the first time that it was shown that taking dietary supplements, especially dietary antioxidants, or not dietary antioxidants, but supplemental antioxidants, may increase your risk of cancer, but also may not be good when you have cancer already. And the same thing was shown for prostate cancer in a large study where they gave vitamin E, also on antioxidants, and the same thing was shown that men who got this vitamin E pills had a higher risk of prostate cancer. Now, why is this unhealthy to take these supplements? It's not always unhealthy, so it definitely is important to know where you are. So if you have an intake which is about average, then you're fine. But if you're too low, so if you are deficient in a certain nutrient, a vitamin or mineral, you have a higher risk of disease. But if you have too much of that nutrient, you also have a higher risk of disease. So there's certainly a sort of in-between safe intake of a vitamin or mineral, and that's account for everything in life. If you don't have enough, it's not good, but if you have too much, it's not good either. If you're undernourished, it's not good, but if you're overnourished, it's not good either. So that's the whole thing about taking these supplements. They usually have a very high percentage in these supplements, so more than 100% of the acceptable daily intake. So it's something to look into. But first thing that you could do is look at whether the deficiencies are really present, because of course they may be present, and then you might have to do something about it. But try first maybe with fortified foods, because then the intake is not that high and more natural than with supplements. So maybe there are some other questions in between, or otherwise we can continue. Philip, just tell me what I have to do.
I think we can continue.
Yeah, shall I continue? Yeah. Okay, yeah. Good.
Okay.
Sorry, Anne? Anne, did you have a question, or you can mute yourself? Okay, we can continue, Prof. Kampman. Anne, mute yourself, please. Anne?
Otherwise, we'll have questions at the end, yeah?
Yeah, it's better.
If there still are questions, okay. If you still can keep with me, this is the shortest part, but the question is are there specific diets that we have to tell people to take during their treatment or after treatment? And there are just many things, as you already said, Philip, also in the Kenyan media, and also in our media, there are many books which promise you all kinds of natural therapies and food that fight cancer, and your diet, your cancer diet, and whatever. So there's so much promises. but there's hardly anything known scientifically, and that makes it a challenge. I don't know about Kenya or other parts in Africa, but what is very favorite in the Netherlands right now is the question whether fasting before treatment could be helpful or not to enhance the efficacy of the treatment. But also for some chemotherapy, it's maybe advisable to take a high fat diet before chemotherapy to make it more effective. Or other people say, well, you should take a ketogenic diet with very low carb diet, very relatively low proteins, but very high in fat. That might help. Or some people say Coca-Cola makes some cancer drugs better. And that's also for some drugs that indeed seems to work. But for now, I would not advise any of that because it's, oh yeah, I also wanted to mention the ginger as well as the turmeric, which is also very, how you call it, very popular right now in the Netherlands. But I would not advise you to take anything of this because it's all based on animal studies only. And with animal studies, it's what they do is they bring in a tumor and they sort of inject diet in that tumor. So they inject the ginger or they inject the Coca-Cola or whatever they do. But it's not similar, so they're not eating our diet. It's really hard to get rats and mice to eat the same things that we do all day, and to let them drink alcohol is also out of the question. So it's really difficult to compare that. Also, their metabolism is of course completely different, so it's really difficult to compare results from animal studies to human studies. And of course, we need those animal studies, because it allows us to learn from the underlying mechanism in the same way that we need in vitro studies. So these are also important studies where we give cells a specific nutrient and then see what's happening, or a toxin or whatever. That learns us a lot as well. But what we ultimately want is, of course, to expose people to certain diets. And that might be especially difficult also to get through a medical ethical committee, like drinking alcohol is not something we would advise anymore, and also not something we can intervene with anymore because that's highly carcinogenic, so we don't do that. So what we are left with is what we have is observational studies. So the picture on the right, an observational study where we just see what people are doing themselves, and then see whether that's increasing their risk or is helping them during their treatment or whatever. And that's the thing we are stuck with, observational studies, which may be flawed by confounding factors or the way we assess dietary intake, but it's the best we have. And actually, it's quite good. It also shows the same things as we see in dietary interventions, or that we see in animal studies if they are available. So these observational studies, but still, as I said, there are 100 different types of cancer, and they're all different. There are different stages of disease, and then nutrition works very differently there. And of course, there are diverse therapies, and so diverse that in this region, in the Netherlands, and as I said, it's a small country, but even there, for the same type of breast cancer, different therapies are advised. So that makes our life as scientists really difficult. But we're struggling on. But what you always have to do, never trust one study. So always you have to pile all your data and then come up with something which holds for all different types of studies and for as many as you can get. Meta-analysis, that's what we need. And we have those meta-analysis for some parts already. And here's a meta-analysis on the effect of diet on mortality and cancer recurrence among cancer survivors. systematic review, meta-analysis of these observational studies, cohort studies, the best there are. And it shows it's 118 studies, not too much, but we're getting there. 210,000 individuals who had cancer. And it shows that a healthy diet is definitely preferable above an unhealthy diet as far as quality of life is concerned and cancer survival is concerned. So definitely a healthy diet is something that we should focus on. Now, there are also already guidelines for cancer survivors. The American Cancer Society has these guidelines, which said that you have to achieve and maintain a healthy weight, which is of course not easy for everybody, not on the malnourished side, not on the overnutrition side. But what is definitely something we should all go for and not wait until therapy is over, but start with it during therapy, is engage in regular physical activity, at least 150 minutes a week, and include strength training exercises at least 2 times a week because of that muscle wasting. And achieve a dietary pattern which is high in vegetables, fruits, and whole grains. But also think about the protein intake, and that might be something which is challenging with a high plant-based diet, but something you can work on. And follow the guidelines for cancer prevention. Now, these are the recommendations to reduce the risk of cancer. These are global recommendations by the World Cancer Research Fund. And that it has the same recommendations to be a healthy weight, be physically active, diet rich in vegetables, fruits, limit consumption of fast foods, processed foods, limit consumption of red and processed meat, for colorectal cancer specifically, limit consumption of sugar and sweetened drinks, not because of the sugar, but because of the calories that these drinks have. And you swallow them very easy, so you have a very high intake of calories without even knowing it. Limit your alcohol consumption, do not use supplements, and breastfeed for breast cancer. And after a cancer diagnosis, follow these recommendations if you can. But as I said, for during and after treatment, there are hardly any evidence-based recommendations because there are not enough studies yet. Studies are not good enough yet. Most studies are focusing on the prevention of cancer. And more than 10,000 studies have been done on the prevention of cancer, but mainly in high-income countries and not yet in Africa, and we have to work on that. And we have to work on studies, good studies, during and after treatment. I just wanted to go through a couple of true and false questions, in the sense that there are so many things that are not true, which are said, and so many things that are false, which are said. So I just wanted to give you a couple of examples of things that are very much discussed in my part of the woods. I don't know whether that's the same in Kenya, but maybe you recognize it. Whether they're facts or fictions. One thing which is very prevalent is probiotics, something which is highly marketed, probiotics, and probiotics are said to be good and fight tumors. Now, just if I was sitting with you in a room, I would ask you to raise hands and ask you whether you think it's a fact or a fiction, but I just have to continue now. But hope I will ever be able to be with you and ask you that question. But for now, it's actually fiction. There's nothing true about this marketing yet. There's no evidence yet for saying that probiotics may prevent tumors to grow. But what is interesting is that we know far more now about microbiota, and we also know that chemotherapy is stripping the whole microbiota, and we're trying to see what kind of foods or what kind of diets may actually build up that microbiota after therapy in a good way. And we all know that high dietary fiber intake due to plant-based diets might have a very favorable effect on microbiota. And that might already be a very good start. So try to get a high fiber diet in, but maybe also probiotics. But for now, I think your sour milk, buttermilk may also be a nice probiotic. Then red meat feeds the tumor. That's also something I sometimes hear because people are afraid that there might be a lot of hormones in red meat or something like that. Actually, also fiction. Red meat is not feeding the tumor, but it definitely is associated with an increased risk of colorectal cancer, and thereby might also be advisable that people, if they have colorectal cancer, reduce their red and processed meat intake. This has to do not with the hormones in the meat, but with the fact that red and processed meat contain heme iron. And heme iron is not toxic, but it can damage the colon wall. So if you have a lot of exposure in your large bowel of this heme iron, it may damage the tissue and may ultimately lead to colorectal cancer. That's the thought that we now have. And we do indeed see that in animal and human intervention studies. Now, sugar feeds cancer. There's a lot to do about sugar in the Netherlands. And as I already gave away, it's not the sugar in itself which feeds the tumor. It's the calories mainly which feeds the tumor. And that's why this is also fiction. But it's certainly something to look into because there's some animal studies which show that some cancers may progress more if they are more exposed to glucose. But then again, that's also direct exposure of the tumor to the glucose. That's not how we eat glucose. That's not how it reaches the tumor. So the metabolism in between is really important. So we have to look into that more. What is the main outcome of everything we now know? We have these WCRF guidelines for cancer prevention. And we're doing a lot of research now to see whether indeed those guidelines are also favorable for people who do have cancer. And indeed, what we mainly see, and there are many publications already, is that it is better for the quality of life. And indeed is showing a lower mortality. So these guidelines, or a healthy diet with more exercise and a healthy weight, is indeed also preferable for, in this case, women with breast cancer, but we also see it for men and women with colorectal cancer. And maybe it's also true for men with prostate cancer. We don't know that yet. But for now, we can say, okay, these guidelines are preferable. Then I want to make some advertisements. This is for our open massive online course, our MOOC. You can follow that online. It's free, unless you want to get credits for that and want to do an exam for that. You can, but otherwise you can follow it for free. And 27 people are already enrolled, so it's something that people seem to like. I don't know, but maybe you can figure it out whether you like it or not. So that's what we have. We have our master program. As I said, you're very welcome to follow that program. It's also online partly, especially where it comes to nutritional epidemiology and public health. It's an online master program. Part-time. It takes 4 years to do that program, because normally our master program is 2 years, and as this is part-time, for people who are already working or are somewhere else, or you can follow that program too. It's a complete master program. Of course, you can also come to Wageningen. You're very welcome after COVID is over, of course. Then we are working on an online grant writing course together with the International Collaboration on Nutrition in Relation to Cancer, the IARC, which is a task force from the International Union of Nutrition Sciences, IUNS, and we're working on a grant writing course because what I see, and I'm in the scientific board of the World Cancer Research Fund, I don't see many grant proposals coming in from Africa. And if I see them coming in, they usually have great ideas for research, but are not written in the way that that English people or English writing people, scientifically writing people want it to look like. So what we are trying to set up is a grant writing course where grants are making a better chance to get through the scientific boards, because it's really necessary. As I said, there's a lot we don't know about cancer in Africa, and as the risk is so much increasing, I think it's really important that we do more research, and especially that you do more research in your countries. I would like to thank my collaborators who are working on cancer in Asia and Africa. And I would especially like to thank Mrs. Phyllis Nokongiri, who died from breast cancer herself in 2016 before she could finish her PhD with us. And I miss her as a colleague, and I miss her as a friend. I miss her dearly. So I just wanted to mention that. So thank you very much. That is what I wanted to share with you, and maybe you still have questions.
Thank you very much, Professor Kampman. Indeed, it is a great loss when Phyllis passed away. Her research is something that we were looking forward to. And that's why I thought it's really important, again, to just have you join us, because my interest is actually to see how we can have more Phyllises come up with studies in regards to nutrition and cancer. And I know we have a lot of nutritionists on board, so hopefully they can pick up that, and some of them can apply to Wageningen. So without taking much time, if you can stop your slides, then you'll be able to have that gallery view so that you can see everyone. And then we can go into questions.
Maybe you have to stop my slides. Oh no, I stop share, I do that.
Yeah, you stop share, and then
I did.
Then you have, there you go, then you have the gallery view. So thank you.
So great. Oh yeah, wonderful. Now I can see everyone. Yeah.
You can see everyone. Thank you very much. Shaira, did you want to say something? I can see a big smile on your face.
I want to say thank you, Elaine. It's amazing to see somebody who's not from Africa with such an interest in what's happening in Africa and helping us and supporting us so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Shaira. And for everyone, we are sorry that next time we'll make sure we increase our coverage, because I think we've locked out probably 100 people who were supposed to join this. But there's a couple of questions. For those who are here, let's go into the questions. I don't know, Prof, if you can be able to see the questions, but I'll read them so that it's easier for you.
Yeah.
And there's someone who is asking about, does juicing vegetables and fruits provide effects? Provide direct vitamin requirements?
Yes, it does. Definitely, I think, but also eating them, just if you can't eat them the way they are, you can juice them, of course, and especially for people who are underweight, it might be a really good idea to juice them. Also because you get a lot more calories in when you juice them, of course. You can eat a lot more apples and all kinds of other things if you juice them. So I think it's a good idea, and it's much better than trying to get them into a dietary supplement.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I think that's very clear. There's a question about Coca-Cola. So somebody is asking, so Coca-Cola is good for cancer patients?
No, as I said, it's there are only animal studies yet. There are very few human studies, and it's only applicable to very specific types of chemotherapy. So in general, I would say the same thing as in the guidelines. So no sugar enriched drinks. So that's also maybe sugar-free Coca-Cola, but still, I would think I would stay with water and tea, and especially coffee. By the way, I didn't mention coffee yet, but that's a big thing right now. 2 weeks ago, another study came out which showed that coffee consumption increases survival in colorectal cancer patients. And this is not the first study that has been published. And also we see that coffee prevents against endometrial cancer, liver cancer, and colorectal cancer. And so this is something we're looking into, thinking, okay, we drink a lot of coffee, also coffee coming from Kenya. I think I think that's very helpful because I'm a real coffee drinker and I don't want to miss out on that. So the idea that it's healthy helps me a lot.
Okay, yeah, so we encourage everyone to drink their coffee. If you're a coffee drinker, please enjoy your coffee, right?
Yeah, exactly, yes. 3 or 4 cups a day, don't overdo it again. No,
Okay. How about deep fried foods, deep frying foods? Is that healthy for people? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
No, it's not healthy for people because usually it's also high caloric deep fried foods, and it might also contain some compounds that are increasing the risk of cancer, which are certainly not favorable. So I would not advise that. No, maybe for people at a very late stage of cancer who can't really eat anything else, but even then, no, I try to avoid those things. That's the same thing as eating fast food in the Netherlands. It's usually also deep fried. So no, that's something I wouldn't recommend. Okay, I know, Professor Kampman, you've done a lot of research on colorectal cancer. Is there any link between spicy food, excessive use of spices in colorectal, stomach cancer, or any intestinal cancers? The only link there is with certain spicy foods is with esophageal cancer. That might indeed increase the risk of squamous type of esophageal cancer. The same with hot tea, by the way. We don't tend to drink our tea very hot, but I did some research in China and Iran where they eat their drinks really hot. It's like boiling water that they sort of throw in. I think that damages your esophagus also really badly. And same thing for spices, which may also sort of irritate the esophageal part. But for colorectal cancer, I'm not aware that there are any studies on showing an increased risk with spices. No. Okay. There are still people who are questioning about sugar, to eat or not to eat sugar for cancer patients. Yeah. And I think this is somebody who was not at the presentation. I think they're saying they missed the point. Okay, good. Well, it's not the sugar in itself, but it's the calories that count. The sugar in itself, as I said, are mainly animal studies so far, and there are no human studies where it's shown that people who have a high intake of sugar, specifically of added sugars like glucose or fructose, have a higher risk unless it's due to their high calorie intake. So high intake of cookies and sweetened drinks and things like that, which is raising your calorie intake, is also increasing the risk of cancer and is also increasing the risk of progression of cancer. So I would be very careful with those kinds of products, but not so much because of sugar in itself. Low carbohydrate diets, sugar is a carbohydrate, but there are also complex carbohydrates that we need, like dietary fiber is a complex carbohydrate that is really important to have a high intake of that. So low carbohydrate diets, like the ketogenic diet, is very popular right now in the Netherlands. It also only seems to help for brain tumors, but then it's only because of the epilepsy symptoms, which it might reduce if you are on a diet like that, like same thing as in epilepsy. We see that the ketogenic diet might help. But then again, so it's symptoms. It has nothing to do with reducing the tumor or anything like that. It reduces the symptoms. And then again, it might be doable, but also a diet, which ketogenic diet is really difficult to sustain, to adhere to. It's not something you can easily do.
Yes, indeed, and it's probably also very expensive to maintain the keto diet.
Yeah.
There's a question on dairy. Do you think, is there any studies that shows any dairy products and risk of risk to cancer, sorry?
Yes, and that's a bit inconsistent. That's why dairy products are also not in the recommendations yet. Dairy products protect against colorectal cancer. And we also see very nice results right now on calcium intake in colorectal cancer survival. So dairy products are the main source of calcium in at least in the Western diet. But a high calcium intake may increase the risk of prostate cancer. But then you have to drink a lot of milk and eat a lot of yogurt and other things. So I think we're sort of getting towards a recommendation for dairy products. There's some studies showing an increased risk for ovarian cancer with dairy products, but also that's a very high intake. So no, I'm not afraid of advising people to consume more dairy products. I would actually, because besides muscle loss, we also see bone loss in colorectal or in cancer patients in general due to some chemotherapy. So also here, it's really important to keep the bone structure at a maximum point, and that's also what people need calcium. And if you can't get calcium through dietary or plant sources, you definitely need your dairy products. So I would be not afraid to suggest that they take dairy products.
So will you encourage anyone who is going through chemotherapy to take calcium supplements?
No, I would take dairy products
instead of supplements, right?
And again, because the supplements, you don't never know how high the dosage will be. And then again, dairy foods do not only contain calcium, they sometimes may also contain microbiota, which are good. They might also contain phosphate. It's a very nice balance also between components. We have such a very nice natural products in our diet. Why should we take unnatural, unbalanced products?
Thank you. I think there's some background. I don't know. We need to mute someone. There's a question about the China study that is linking animal products intake to increased onset and progression of cancer than plant-based diet. Is this something you come across in your studies?
Yes, I said, I don't know whether I get the question right, but the recommendation for plant-based diets, more plant-based diets, is definitely due to the fact that red meat and processed meat increases the risk of colorectal cancer. So that's why the focus mainly is on plant-based diets more than on red meat and processed meat. It doesn't mean that you have to to not eat chicken, for instance. You know, vegetarians do not have a low risk of cancer, which may also be due to the fact that they miss out on some B vitamins sometimes. And if you do not do it in a proper way, eating a completely plant-based diet, you may have deficiencies in B12, other B vitamins, which may also not be very healthy. So advising people completely plant-based diets, you have to know exactly what you're doing. And also this might be very, might not be that favorable. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I think I can take two more questions and then we will end the presentation. And this goes, this is for fruit intake. You know, when you have fruit with your meal, does that increase your risk of cancer?
Oh, no, definitely not. Fruit with your meal is a good thing to do. If possible, yes, because otherwise it will be difficult to get you, maybe to get your 2 pieces of fruit in per day. That's the recommendation. And I see that only, I don't know about people in Africa, but in the Netherlands, about 10% of the population is adhering to the 2 pieces of fruits per day. And so the more you can get in, and even during a meal, there's nothing, it's sometimes even good if you combine fruits with other plants. For instance, if you're having iron deficiency, it might be good to have a higher intake of antioxidants at the same time, of vitamin C, to be able to absorb non-heme iron. So it's definitely good to combine these things in a diet, better than taking a supplement with the diet. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I think this would be the last question. I've not come across this. I'm hearing it. I'm seeing it for the first time. Is there any relationship between ARV, antiretrovirals, and osteosarcoma?
Oh, good question. I wouldn't know that. I have absolutely no idea. But what I do think, and I'm trying to get into that more, is that there are many types of cancers that are more related to viruses than we know. And so I think that's a really important question. I think even with breast cancer, I sometimes think that it might be partly due to viruses as well. And also colorectal cancer, we know that it's something that we have to look into far more than we are doing now. It's a really interesting type of research, and you can also see it in the pathology sections of the tumors. Some labs are able to pick up whether you can find these viruses in the tumor itself, and that also gives you a clue whether indeed this particular cancer was due to a virus infection.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Kampman, for your time, for the presentation. I think it's been a lot of learning for me. Every time you present, I learn something new, and I know we also learn something new. It's not your first time presenting at Faraja. I remember when you presented before, and there's a lot of information. And hopefully, this might not be the last time we are seeing you, hopefully.
Hopefully not. I thank you very much for asking me, and thank you very much for listening to me, all of you, and for asking questions. I will go through the questions in the Zoom because I learn a lot from it as well, because I have no clue what are the actual questions that you have. I also hope to work with you and keep in contact and see what possibilities you have for additional studies in Africa, because we really need to get answers to the question that Phyllis had. And there are so many more questions. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And we'll share the video for those who joined, those who might want the video and the slides. We will share them and your contacts will be there. So if there's anyone who wants to reach out to you, About even the grant writing, is it free? By the way, I forgot, there was a question about the grant writing. Is
I
it
don't know
free?
yet. I'm still negotiating with the World Cancer Research Fund and with IUNS to get it for free, indeed. That's my ultimate goal, to get a free grant writing course in Africa.
Thank you.
That would be great, I think, and necessary.
Thank you very much. Shaira wanted to say something. Shaira is our founding trustee. Shaira, go ahead.
I just wanted to ask Ellen, are there any studies about nutrition for children's cancer or cancers that are common amongst children? Because we very rarely hear anything about nutrition and, you know, so whether it's for leukemia or whether it's for eye cancers or kidney cancers. And if there is, maybe our next session could be on children's cancer.
Maybe you have to wait a couple of years because the research on that is starting to grow, also because unfortunately the incidence of cancer in children is increasing. And now in the Netherlands we just started a large children's hospital for cancer patients. And here we are also starting a cohort study where we are following these children over time and see whether indeed nutrition influences their survival. And what we do see already is that they have especially a great loss of muscle mass and increase in fat mass. But the etiology of children's cancers does not seem to be so much related to that lifestyle because they were not exposed for a long period of time. But it might be, and that's why I think it's really interesting, what we do see is that it might be due to some nutritional deficiencies in pregnancy. And that might be especially important for lower middle income countries, I think, but also for us, because we also see we see deficiencies in folate, for instance. And folate might also be related to leukemia, but we're not sure yet. So that's something that we really have to look into. Yes. So maybe if you ask me again, maybe, and I can bring an expert because that's not my expertise, but I know that a lot of people working, young people are starting to work on this now. So I'm really glad that they're doing that.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We really appreciate and have a good time. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much. Have a great day and stay COVID free.
Yes, stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, bye, bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye.
You're welcome.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll go through the questions, Philip, before I hang up.
Sorry?
I'll go through the questions before I hang up. So
no problem. We'll let you go through them.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks you.